A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. The Refusal. The kitchen of Castle Valthrin smelled of roasted venison and burnt sugar. Ilara kept her head down as she scrubbed at the copper pots, her hands red and raw from the scalding water. 6 years she had worked these kitchens, ever since her father Bryn fell defending the southern borders. 6 years of invisible servitude, of keeping her wolf quiet and her head low. It was safer that way. Omegas who drew attention rarely lasted long in the castle. "Girl," Cook Marta barked from across the stone kitchen. "Lord Steward wants you in the Great Hall. Now." Ilara's hands stilled in the water. Servants were never summoned to the Great Hall unless something had gone terribly wrong. Her mind raced through possible offenses. Had she broken something valuable? Overheard conversations she shouldn't have? "Move, child," Marta said, softer this time. Something that might have been pity flickered across her weathered face. Best not keep them waiting. Ilara dried her hands on her apron, removed it, and smoothed down her simple brown dress. The fabric was coarse, patched in places, but clean. Her father had taught her that dignity wasn't about fine clothes. It was about how you carried yourself when the world tried to break you. She could still hear his voice sometimes, in quiet moments. "Stand tall, little one." A bent back invites a boot. The great hall stretched before her, vast and cold. Torches flickered in iron sconces along the stone walls, casting dancing shadows across the gathered nobles. Ilara's breath caught. This wasn't a simple summons. This was court. At the far end of the hall, seated on the ancient throne of black iron and silver, was Alpha King Vilcor. Even from this distance, his presence dominated the space. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, and his beard was neatly trimmed in the style of warrior kings. His eyes were the deep green of forest shadows, and they tracked her approach with unnerving focus. She had seen him before, of course. Everyone in the castle had. But servants weren't meant to look directly at the Alpha King, weren't meant to notice the scars that marked his hands and forearms, the way he held himself with controlled violence barely leashed. Ilara walked forward, her worn shoes whispering against the stone floor. The crowd of nobles parted reluctantly, their expensive silks and velvets a stark contrast to her servant's dress. She heard the whispers. Why summon a kitchen girl? What could she possibly have done? Look at her. She's nobody. Nobody. Yes, she had worked very hard to be nobody for 6 years. She stopped 10 paces from the throne and dropped into a curtsy, head bowed. The stone floor was cold beneath her knees. Ilara, daughter of Bryn. Vilcor's voice carried across the hall without effort, deep and commanding. "You may rise." She stood, keeping her eyes appropriately lowered. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced her breathing to remain steady. Whatever this was, she would face it the way her father had taught her. "You have served this castle loyally for 6 years, Vilcor continued. There was something strange in his tone, something she couldn't quite identify. "Your service has been noted. This wasn't how punishments began." Ilara's confusion must have shown on her face because she heard a few scattered chuckles from the nobles. "Lord Vorian," Vilcor said, and Ilara's blood turned to ice. "Step forward." The crowd shifted again, and there he was, Lord Vorian of the Northern Holdings, tall and broad-shouldered, his graying blonde hair catching the torchlight. He smiled at her, and it was the smile of a wolf who had cornered prey. She knew that smile. Had seen it 3 years ago, on a summer evening during the Festival of the Twin Moons. The memory crashed over her, vivid and terrible. She had been gathering moonflower by the lake, the medicinal herb that grew only during festival nights. The voices had drawn her attention. A man and a woman, arguing in harsh whispers near the water's edge. "Please, Vorian, I'll be more careful, I swear it. You've embarrassed me for the last time, wife." Ilara had ducked behind a willow tree, barely breathing. She had watched through the trailing branches as Vorian grabbed his wife by the throat, watched as he forced her head under the water, watched as Lady Vorian's struggles grew weaker, then stopped. When it was over, Vorian had arranged her body carefully, making it look as though she had simply fallen in. Accidental drowning. A tragic loss. Ilara had remained frozen behind that tree for what felt like hours, clutching her basket of moonflowers so tightly the stems had cut into her palms. She had told no one. Who would believe a low-ranking Omega over a powerful lord? Who would protect her when Vorian inevitably discovered she had witnessed his crime? So she had buried it deep, that terrible knowledge, and made herself even more invisible than before. Now Vorian stood before the throne, and his cold blue eyes found hers. He knew she had seen. He had to know. Why else would he look at her with such vicious satisfaction? Lord Vorian has made a generous offer, Vilcor said, and Alara forced herself to focus on the Alpha King's words. He seeks a wife to manage his household, to bring stability to his northern lands. He has chosen you, Alara. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Chosen her? For marriage. It is an honor well above your station, Vilcor continued. This union will strengthen the bond between the crown and the northern territories. It serves the kingdom. Ilara's mind raced. This was why he wanted her. Not as a wife, but as a prisoner. She was the only witness to his crime, the only loose thread in his carefully woven lie. If she became his wife, she would be entirely under his control, isolated in his northern castle, far from anyone who might help her. And if she tried to speak the truth, a wife who accused her husband of murdering his previous wife would be dismissed as mad, jealous, or both. He would have her locked away. Or worse. You are commanded to accept this proposal, Vilcor said. And there was something odd in his voice again. That strange note she couldn't place. Speak your answer, Alara. The hall fell silent. Every noble, every guard, every servant pressed against the walls to witness this unexpected drama. They all waited for her to do what she was supposed to do, to bow her head, to murmur her grateful acceptance, to seal her own fate. Alara thought of her father, thought of his calloused hands teaching her to hold a sword when she was barely tall enough to lift one, thought of his voice in the darkness. Courage isn't the absence of fear, little one. It's choosing dignity over survival. She had survived for 6 years by being invisible, by swallowing her voice, by accepting that the world was cruel, and survival meant submission. But her father hadn't raised her to survive. He had raised her to live. She lifted her chin and met Vilcor's green eyes directly. It was a breach of protocol that made several nobles gasp. You didn't look an Alpha King in the eyes. Not if you wanted to keep them. No, Alara said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried in the shocked silence. I refuse. The hall erupted. Nobles shouted their outrage. Guards stepped forward, hands moving to weapons. Vorian's face contorted with rage before he schooled it back to false confusion. But Alara kept her eyes on Vilcor. Something flickered across his face. Surprise? No, not surprise. Something else. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. You dare refuse a command from your Alpha King? Vilcor's voice cut through the chaos, silencing the hall instantly. I dare, Alara said. Her hands were shaking, but she kept them steady at her sides. I would rather die with dignity than live without it. The words hung in the air between them. She had just signed her own death warrant. Defiance of a direct royal command meant execution. Everyone in the hall knew it. Vorian stepped forward, his false concern a transparent mask. Your Majesty, the girl is clearly disturbed. Perhaps time in the dungeons to reconsider? Silence, Vilcor said, not looking away from Alara. She has made her choice clear. The Alpha King rose from his throne, and the movement was fluid, predatory. He descended the 3 steps to the main floor, his boots ringing against stone. The crowd parted before him as water before the prow of a ship. He stopped directly in front of Alara. Up close, he was even more imposing, tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. The scars on his hands were clearer now, old wounds from blade and claw. His scent surrounded her, pine smoke and winter storms and something wild beneath. Kneel, he commanded. This was it then. The execution. Alara had seen enough of them to know how they proceeded. The condemned kneeling before the throne, the Alpha King's judgment delivered, the swift fall of the headsman's axe. She lowered herself to her knees, the stone cold and unforgiving beneath her. If she was going to die, she would do it the way her father had lived. With courage, with honor. She looked up at Vilcor one last time. I'm ready. His eyes held hers for a long moment, and she could have sworn she saw something shift in those green depths. Not cruelty, not anger, respect. Then he turned to face the assembled court. 6 months ago, I inherited a kingdom built on fear. My father ruled through terror, and I inherited his throne along with his methods, but I did not inherit his vision. He paused, letting his words sink in. I have tested many in this court, given commands that no just ruler should give, commands designed to measure loyalty against conscience. Ilara's breath caught. Tested? 47 times I have given such commands, Vilcor continued. 47 times. My nobles, my advisors, my warriors have obeyed without question. They would see innocent families cast out, property seized without cause, lives destroyed, all because their king commanded it. His voice hardened. 47 times, not one soul in this kingdom had the courage to say no. The hall was utterly silent now. Every face showed shock, confusion, or dawning understanding. Until today, Vilcor said. Until a kitchen servant, an Omega with no power and no protection, looked her king in the eye and chose death over injustice. He turned back to Ilara, still kneeling before him. His hand moved to his head, and he lifted the crown of black iron and silver from his own brow. The world seemed to stop. The law is clear, Vilcor said. Defiance of the Alpha King's command is punishable by death, but the law also grants the Alpha King absolute authority over matters of justice and mercy. He held the crown before him, ancient metal gleaming in torchlight. I cannot pardon you without appearing weak, but I can make you my equal. Ilara's mind went blank. Equal? What did that? Vilcor lowered the crown toward her head, and the moment the metal touched her hair, the world exploded. Power slammed through her, raw and electric. Her eyes burned, the amber deepening to silver-touched gold. Vilcor's green eyes blazed with the same sudden fire. Emerald shot through with molten gold. Energy crackled in the air between them, visible as dancing sparks. Every shifter in the hall recoiled from the force of it. The mate bond. Real, undeniable, impossible to hide. Ilara gasped as sensation overwhelmed her. She could feel him, feel Vilcor in a way that went beyond the physical. His presence wrapped around her consciousness, foreign and familiar at once, and beneath the shock she felt his own stunned disbelief mirroring hers. He had been testing for courage. He hadn't been testing for this. The crown settled on her head, surprisingly heavy, warm from Vilcor's body heat. The crackling energy slowly faded, but the bond remained, a golden thread connecting her awareness to his. Behold, Vilcor's voice was rough, shaken for the first time. Your Luna, your queen, the only soul in this kingdom brave enough to defy injustice, even at the cost of her life. The crowd stared in absolute silence. Then, slowly, uncertainly, they began to kneel. Noble after noble, guard after guard, dropping to one knee in acknowledgement, all except Lord Vorian. His face had gone white, then red. Fury burned in his cold blue eyes. He had planned to silence the one witness to his crime, and instead she had just been crowned queen. Ilara met his gaze steadily. She was no longer the invisible kitchen girl he could dispose of quietly. She wore the crown of Valthrin now, but the crown didn't erase her fear. It didn't erase the memory of his wife's body, limp and lifeless in the lake water. It didn't erase the knowledge that she had just made an enemy of one of the most dangerous men in the kingdom, and it didn't erase the more terrifying truth. She could still feel Vilcor through that bond, feel his surprise, his confusion, his reluctant fascination. He had rejected the very idea of fated mates publicly, called them superstition and weakness. Now he was bound to one. She had refused a forced marriage to a murderer, only to find herself mated to an Alpha King who had used her as a test subject, who had put her life in danger to prove a philosophical point about courage. Vilcor extended his hand to help her rise. Through the bond, she felt his carefully controlled turmoil. He had not planned this. Neither of them had. Ilara looked at his outstretched hand, looked at the crown now resting on her own head, looked at the assembled nobles and the murderous rage on Vorian's face. She had survived 6 years by being invisible, by staying silent, by accepting that the world was cruel, that Ilara was dead. The woman who rose to her feet, ignoring Vilcor's offered hand, was someone different, someone who had said no to power and lived, someone who wore a crown and could feel the mate bond burning between her soul and a king she didn't trust. Someone who had just declared war on a murderer without speaking a single word. The great hall erupted into controlled chaos as nobles processed this impossible turn of events. But Alara stood still, the crown heavy on her head, and thought of her father. Courage, he had said, is choosing dignity over survival. She had chosen. Now she would live with the consequences. Chapter 2. Crown and Consequence. The world narrowed to the feeling of cold metal against Alara's scalp, and the impossible surge of power connecting her to the man before her. Through the golden thread of the mate bond, she felt Vilcor's shock mirror her own, felt the careful control he maintained even as his entire understanding of himself shattered. He had not planned this. The thought was clear as crystal through their connection, and somehow that made everything worse. The crowd remained frozen, uncertain how to react to what they had just witnessed. A mate bond manifesting before the entire court was rare under any circumstances. Between an alpha king and a kitchen servant? Unheard of. Vilcor's hand remained extended, steady despite the turmoil she could sense beneath his composed exterior. "Rise, my queen," he said, his deep voice carrying across the silent hall. Alara looked at his offered hand. Through the bond, she felt his expectation that she would take it, that she would play the role of grateful Omega elevated beyond her station. She stood on her own, ignoring his outstretched palm. The slight widening of his eyes was the only indication of surprise, but through the bond she felt something sharper. Not anger. Curiosity, perhaps, or challenge. "The Luna will require appropriate chambers," Vilcor announced, turning to address the still kneeling court. His hand dropped to his side. "Lord Steward, see to the preparations. The West Wing, overlooking the gardens." "The West Wing, Your Majesty?" The Lord Steward's voice squeaked slightly. "But those are the royal apartments, adjacent to your own chambers." Did I stutter? The temperature in the hall seemed to drop 10 degrees. The Lord Steward's head bowed lower. "Of course not, Your Majesty. At once." As the crowd began to rise, uncertain conversations breaking out in hushed whispers, Vorian finally moved. He approached the throne, his expression carefully neutral, but Alara could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing with perfect form, "this is indeed a momentous occasion. The kingdom rejoices at your good fortune." "Does it?" Vilcor's tone was mild, but there was steel beneath the silk. "You rejoice, Lord Vorian, at having your bride stolen away? I rejoice that she has found a station more suited to her. Unique qualities," Vorian replied smoothly. His gaze flicked to Alara, and she saw the promise there. This wasn't over, though I confess surprise at the revelation of a mate bond. One hears stories, of course, but to witness such a thing, stories often prove true, Vilcor said, as do other things whispered in dark corners. Justice, for instance, tends to find its way to light eventually. Was that a threat? Alara couldn't tell if Vilcor knew about the murder or was simply making conversation. Through the bond, she felt his attention was entirely focused on Vorian, sharp and assessing. "Indeed," Vorian said carefully. "I look forward to serving you both with loyalty and dedication." He bowed again, deeper this time. "If you will excuse me, I should return to my holdings. Much to arrange." "By all means," Vilcor said. "Though I expect you to remain at court for the coronation ceremonies. A week hence, I think. Time enough to prepare properly." "A week?" Vorian's smile tightened fractionally. "Of course, Your Majesty. I am honored." As Vorian retreated through the crowd, Alara felt the weight of dozens of stares. The nobles were recovering from their shock, and she could practically see the calculations happening behind their eyes. Kitchen servant to queen in the span of minutes. Some looked resentful, others opportunistic. A few seemed genuinely curious. "Come," Vilcor said quietly, meant only for her ears. "We need to speak privately. I have nothing to say to you," Alara replied, keeping her voice equally low. Through the bond, she felt his flash of irritation quickly suppressed. "Nevertheless, we will speak, unless you prefer to have this conversation before the entire court." She met his green eyes, seeing the gold still flickering in their depths. The bond pulled at her, urging closeness, connection. She hated it. Hated that her body responded to his nearness, that some part of her wanted to trust him despite everything. "Lead the way, Your Majesty," she said coldly. If her tone bothered him, he didn't show it. He simply turned and began walking toward the great doors at the far end of the hall. The crowd parted instantly, nobles bowing and stepping back. Ilara followed, acutely aware of her simple brown dress among their silks and velvets, of her rough hands and practical braid compared to their elegant coiffures. The crown sat heavy on her head, foreign and uncomfortable. They walked in silence through stone corridors lit by torches. Guards snapped to attention as they passed, eyes carefully forward. Servants pressed themselves against walls, heads bowed. Ilara had been one of them just hours ago, invisible and ignored. Now they stared at the floor, but she could feel their attention like a physical weight. Vilcor led her to a set of carved wooden doors, which guards pulled open to reveal a study. Maps covered the walls, marked with territories and holdings. A large desk dominated one side, covered in parchments and sealed letters. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled with leather-bound volumes. He closed the door behind them, and suddenly the space felt much smaller. "You're angry," Vilcor said, moving to stand behind his desk. Not sitting, not yet. Maintaining the physical advantage of height. "Brilliant observation," Ilara replied. "Did the bond tell you that? Or did you deduce it yourself?" His jaw tightened. "I understand this is not what you expected." "Expected?" She laughed, sharp and bitter. "I expected to die. You put me in front of the entire court, let me believe I was being executed, all to prove some philosophical point about courage and justice. And now I'm bound to you for life because of some cosmic joke." "The bond is not a joke," Vilcor said quietly. "It is rare, precious." "It is a trap," Ilara interrupted. "You rejected fated mates publicly, called them weakness and superstition. How convenient that your mate bond manifests the exact moment you need to justify not executing me." Through the bond, she felt his genuine offense at the accusation. "You think I planned this? That I somehow orchestrated the mate bond? I don't know what to think," Ilara said. "I don't know you. I don't trust you. And now I'm connected to you in a way I can't undo. Forced into a role I never wanted. Wearing a crown I never asked for." Vilcor was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was measured. "Careful. You are right. You don't know me. But you should know this. I did not expect the bond. I was testing for courage, for integrity. Those qualities are so rare in this court, so buried under layers of fear and ambition, that I needed to find someone who possessed them. I chose tests I could undo," Vilcor said quietly. "Every cruel order I gave, I overturned within days. Families reinstated, property returned, reparations paid from my private coffers. Their obedience still damned them, but the innocent did not carry the cost of my experiment." "So you risked my life," Ilara said flatly. "I gave you a choice," he corrected. "Perhaps not a fair one, but more than most people in your position ever receive. You could have accepted Vorian's proposal. You would have lived, under his control, forever silenced." The words escaped before she could stop them. Vilcor's eyes sharpened. Silenced about what? Ilara hesitated. She had kept the secret for 3 years, had trained herself not to think about it, not to let any hint of knowledge show on her face. But Vorian was here at court, would remain here for a week, and she was no longer an invisible servant he could dispose of quietly. Through the bond, she felt Vilcor's intense focus, his mind working rapidly through possibilities. 3 years ago, she said slowly, during the festival of the twin moons, I was gathering moonflower by the lake. I saw Lord Vorian arguing with his wife. I saw him drown her. Vilcor's jaw tightened. I questioned the manner of her death, he admitted. The council swore it was an accident, and at the time I had no proof to challenge them. Your testimony doesn't create my suspicion, Ilara. It confirms the unease I've carried since that night. And when that same man suddenly asked for a kitchen servant he barely knew as a bride, he added, I knew something was rotten. I just didn't yet know what. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Vilcor's hands, resting on the desk, curled into fists. Through the bond, She felt his rage, cold and controlled and absolutely lethal. "You witnessed a murder," he said softly, "and told no one." Who would have believed a kitchen servant over a powerful lord? Ilara met his gaze steadily. Who would have protected me when he came to silence the witness? I survived by being invisible, by keeping secrets, and Vorian knew you had seen. I think he suspected. Today's proposal confirmed it. He intended to marry me, isolate me in his northern holdings, and ensure I could never speak. Vilcor circled the desk, moving closer. Ilara held her ground, though the bond urged her to step forward, to close the distance between them. "Do you have proof?" he asked. "Witnesses? Evidence?" "I know what I saw," Ilara said. "Another servant, the laundress, was at the lake that night. I don't know if she saw what I did, but she might have." "Then we investigate," Vilcor said immediately. Quietly, carefully. "If Vorian murdered his wife, he will answer for it." Just like that, Ilara couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "You believe me without question?" Through the bond, she felt his absolute certainty. "I tested 47 people for courage and integrity. 47 people failed. You were the only one willing to die rather than compromise your principles. Why would you lie about this?" It was the first thing he had said that felt entirely genuine. Not strategic, not political. Simply true. "Because," she said quietly, "I have lived too long watching evil go unpunished, watching the powerful crush the weak. I refuse to be part of that system anymore, even if it costs me everything." Something shifted in Vilcor's expression. The careful control slipped, just for a moment, and she saw the man beneath the crown. Tired. Burdened. Trying so hard to be different from his father. "That," he said, "is why the bond chose us." The words hung in the air between them. Through their connection, she felt the truth of what he believed. That the mate bond didn't create compatibility. It recognized it, found two souls fighting the same battles and bound them together. It was a romantic notion. It was also terrifying. "I need time," Ilara said. "Time to process this. Time to figure out who I am now that I'm wearing this crown." "Time you shall have," Vilcor agreed. "Your chambers are being prepared. They are yours alone. I will not enter without invitation." The promise meant more than he perhaps realized. She had expected demands, expectations of immediate intimacy that the mate bond seemed to encourage. Instead, he was offering space. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. He nodded once, then moved back toward his desk. "We should discuss the coronation ceremony. There are traditions, protocols." "Tomorrow," Ilara interrupted. "Please, I have gone from kitchen servant to condemned woman to queen in the span of hours. I need to breathe." Through the bond, she felt his reluctant understanding. "Tomorrow, then. I will have servants bring you appropriate clothing. Meals will be provided. If you need anything, I will manage," Ilara said. She turned toward the door, then paused. "One question. Ask. The test. You said 47 people obeyed unjust commands without question. What would you have done if I had obeyed as well? If no one ever said no?" Vilcor was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with a truth he had perhaps never admitted aloud. "I would have known that my father's legacy of fear was complete, that there was no honor left in this kingdom worth saving, and I would have ruled alone, as he did, because no one deserved to stand beside me." The loneliness in those words struck deeper than any plea or promise could have. Through the bond, she felt the weight he carried, the desperate hope that had driven him to test dozens of people, searching for someone who still believed in something beyond survival. She had been that someone, and the bond had chosen to bind them for it. Ilara left the study without another word, following a servant who appeared as if summoned. The corridors seemed longer now, the castle larger and more labyrinthine. She focused on walking steadily, on keeping her head high despite exhaustion pulling at her limbs. The west wing was beautiful. Her chambers were larger than the entire quarters she had shared with 5 other kitchen servants. Tapestries covered stone walls, depicting forests and hunts and ancient battles. A massive bed dominated one wall, piled with furs and blankets. Windows overlooked gardens below, now shadowed in early evening. "Your dinner will be brought shortly, my lady," the servant said, curtsying low. "Is there anything else you require?" "No," Alara said. Thank you. The servant left, and Alara was finally, blessedly alone. She reached up and removed the crown, setting it on a nearby table. Her scalp ached where the metal had pressed. She moved to the window, looking out at the darkening gardens. Somewhere below, her father was buried in the castle cemetery, in a modest grave marked with his name and rank. Guard, protector, father, I hope you would be proud, she whispered to the glass. I said no, just like you taught me. Through the bond, distant but present, she felt Vilcor in his study, felt his focus as he worked through correspondence, his mind already planning investigations and strategies. He was thinking about Vorian, about justice, about how to prove a 3-year-old murder. He was thinking about protecting her. Alara closed her eyes against the pull of the bond, against the part of her that wanted to return to that study, to plan together, to accept this strange partnership fate had forced upon them. Tomorrow she would be practical. Tomorrow she would learn protocols and attend meetings and figure out how to be a queen. Tonight, she would simply survive having her entire world remade in a single day. Chapter 3. Nightmares and Truth. Sleep would not come. Alara lay in the enormous bed, surrounded by furs and silks that felt foreign against her skin, and stared at the carved wooden ceiling above. The crown sat on the table across the room, catching moonlight through the window. An hour passed. Then 2. The exhaustion that had pulled at her earlier refused to translate into rest. Instead, a dull ache began building behind her temples, spreading down her neck and into her chest. Not quite pain, but pressure, wrongness, the mate bond, she realized. Demanding proximity she refused to give. She pressed her palm against her sternum, feeling her heartbeat irregular beneath. Through the bond, distant but present, she sensed Vilcor. Awake, like her. The same discomfort pulling at him. Good, she thought viciously. Let him suffer too. But the spite didn't ease the ache. By the time dawn light began creeping through the windows, painting the stone walls pale gold, Alara felt hollow, nauseated. Her head throbbed with each pulse. A knock at the door made her flinch. My lady? A servant's voice, female and uncertain. His Majesty requests your presence in the library. When you are ready, of course. Alara pushed herself upright, swaying slightly as the headache intensified. I will come shortly. The servant who had spoken the night before appeared with clothing. Simple by noble standards, but finer than anything Alara had owned. A dress of deep blue wool, soft against her skin. The servant helped her dress and pin her hair in a style befitting a queen, though her hands remained rough and calloused beneath the finery. The library occupied the eastern tower, filled with books and scrolls and the smell of old parchment. Morning sun streamed through tall windows. Vilcor stood at a table covered in maps, his back to the door. He didn't turn when she entered, but through the bond she felt his awareness of her presence. The moment she crossed the threshold, the ache in her chest eased fractionally. You didn't sleep, Vilcor said, still studying the maps. His voice was rough with exhaustion. Neither did you. The bond makes separation uncomfortable. He finally turned to face her. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, making the green seem brighter by contrast. It will worsen if we continue fighting it. Then we fight it, Alara said flatly. I won't be forced into proximity because some cosmic force demands it. Something flickered across his face. Frustration, perhaps, or understanding. As you wish. Though I would prefer my queen functional rather than collapsing from bond sickness. Your concern is touching. It's practical, Vilcor corrected. We have work to do. Vorian won't wait patiently while we argue about sleeping arrangements. The mention of Vorian focused her attention. Alara moved closer to the table, noting the maps marked territories and trade routes. What are you planning? Investigation, Vilcor said. You witnessed a murder 3 years ago. If we can find evidence, proof beyond your word, we can move against him legally. He glanced at her. Tell me everything. Every detail you remember. So Alara did. She described the festival night, the moonflower growing by the lake's edge, the voices that had drawn her attention. She recounted the argument, the violence, the careful way Vorian had arranged his wife's body to suggest accident. Vilcor listened without interruption, his focus absolute. Through the bond, she felt his mind working rapidly, cataloging details and forming strategies. You said another servant might have been there, he prompted when she finished. The laundress. I saw her at the lake earlier that evening, washing linens in the shallows. I don't know if she witnessed the murder, but she would have been nearby. What's her name? Greta. She's elderly. Works in the lower washrooms. Vilcor moved to the door and spoke quietly to the guard stationed outside. Within minutes, a nervous woman in her 60s was ushered into the library. Her hands twisted in her apron as she curtsied low. You sent for me, Your Majesty? 3 years ago, during the Festival of the Twin Moons, Vilcor said gently. You were at the lake. Do you remember that night? Greta's face went pale. Her eyes darted to Alara, then back to Vilcor. Your Majesty, I don't... You're not in trouble, Alara said, moving forward. The woman flinched slightly, and Alara realized she was now the queen. Her word carried weight, authority. Please. We need to know what you saw. I saw Lord Vorian, Greta whispered. With Lady Vorian. I was in the willows, finishing the linens. I heard them arguing. Tears began streaming down her weathered cheeks. I saw him push her under the water, saw him hold her there. And I did nothing. I was too afraid. You did nothing wrong, Vilcor said firmly. Fear of powerful men is not cowardice. It's survival. Will you testify to what you saw? Alara asked, formally, before the court. Greta's hands shook harder. He'll kill me. He won't touch you. Vilcor's voice carried absolute conviction. You have my word as Alpha King. Speak truth, and you will be protected. The woman looked between them, searching their faces. Finally, she nodded. I'll speak. That poor lady deserves justice. After Greta left, escorted by trusted guards to safe quarters, Vilcor returned to his maps. 2 witnesses. It's a start, but not conclusive. We need more. Physical evidence, if any remains. Testimony from others who knew the marriage was troubled. How do we find that without alerting Vorian? Alara asked. Carefully. Vilcor looked at her directly. This is why I needed someone I could trust. Someone who sees injustice and refuses to accept it. The court is full of people who will tell me what I want to hear, or what benefits them. You told me truth when it could have cost your life. You keep saying that, Alara said. But you barely know me. How can you trust me based on one moment of defiance? Because defiance under threat of death reveals character, Vilcor replied. Anyone can be brave when it's convenient. You chose principle over survival. That's not a decision made lightly or falsely. They worked through the morning, planning approaches and identifying potential witnesses. The headache that had plagued Alara faded as they remained in proximity, the bond settling into reluctant contentment. Around midday, Vilcor called for food. They ate in the library, continuing their discussion between bites of bread and cheese. Alara found herself grudgingly impressed by his methodical approach. He anticipated problems, planned contingencies, considered angles she hadn't thought to examine. Why did your father rule through fear? She asked suddenly, the question emerging before she could reconsider it. Vilcor stilled, bread halfway to his mouth. That's a complicated question. We have time. He set the bread down carefully. Through the bond, she felt his instinctive withdrawal, the walls rising. But then, deliberately, he pushed past them. He believed fear created order, Vilcor said. Mercy was weakness. Compassion was vulnerability. He beat those lessons into me from childhood. Any hesitation, any moment of doubt, was punished severely. Alara remembered the scars on his hands and arms. He hurt you. He trained me, Vilcor corrected, though his tone was hollow. At least, that's what he called it. Made me watch executions from age 6. Made me participate by 10. Anyone who questioned his rule disappeared. Anyone who showed weakness was crushed. And you survived by becoming what he wanted. I survived by learning to hide what I felt, Vilcor said. To separate duty from emotion, it's a skill that serves well in ruling. And a curse that makes connection nearly impossible. The vulnerability in his words surprised her. This was the Alpha King, the most powerful shifter in the kingdom, admitting isolation and damage. Is that why you rejected fated mates? Alara asked quietly. Because connection felt like weakness? Yes. The admission was simple. Honest. I watched my father use my mother's devotion as a weapon against her. Watched the bond destroy her spirit over years. I swore I would never be vulnerable that way. Would never let anyone have that power over me. And now you're bound to someone you didn't choose. To someone who reminds me hourly that I don't control everything. Vilcor said, and something in his tone might have been wry humor. The universe has a sense of irony. Despite herself, Ilara felt sympathy stirring. They were both trapped by the bond, both fighting against a fate neither wanted. But where she feared loss of autonomy, he feared vulnerability after a lifetime of armor. They returned to planning, but the atmosphere had shifted. The work continued into evening, until exhaustion made concentration difficult. Vilcor finally stood, stretching muscles gone stiff from hours of sitting. "We should rest," he said. "Continue this tomorrow." The prospect of another night fighting the bond's demands made Ilara's chest tighten. But she nodded, maintaining her resolve. "Sleep well," Vilcor said, and left the library. Ilara returned to her chambers as darkness fell. She prepared for bed, dismissing the servants early. The ache in her chest returned almost immediately, worse than the previous night. She lay in the darkness, trying to breathe through the discomfort, telling herself it would pass. Hours crawled by. The pain sharpened, spreading through her ribs and into her limbs. Through the bond, she felt Vilcor's matching discomfort, felt him fighting sleep as she was. Then, around midnight, something changed. Vilcor's presence through the bond spiked with sudden distress. Not physical pain, but terror, raw and overwhelming. Ilara sat up, heart racing. Something was wrong. She left her chambers, bare feet silent on cold stone. Guards snapped to attention as she passed, but she ignored them. The bond pulled her forward, guiding her through corridors she barely knew. She stopped at a heavy wooden door, Vilcor's chambers. Through the wood, she heard sounds, harsh breathing, a low sound that might have been a groan or a whimper. Ilara pushed the door open. Vilcor lay in his bed, tangled in sheets, his body rigid with tension. His eyes were closed but moving rapidly beneath the lids. Dreaming, but not peacefully. His hands clenched and unclenched, and his breathing came in ragged gasps. Through the bond, she felt the nightmare. Fragments, impressions, stone walls running with blood. A younger Vilcor, barely more than a boy, holding a sword over a kneeling prisoner. His father's voice, cold and approving. "Do it. Show me you're strong." Ilara moved to the bed without thinking. She sat on the edge, reaching out to touch his shoulder. "Vilcor, wake up." His eyes snapped open, blazing gold in the darkness. For a moment he didn't seem to recognize her, his wolf too close to the surface. Then awareness returned, and the gold faded back to green. "Ilara?" His voice was rough, confused. "What are you doing here?" "You were dreaming," she said simply. He sat up, pushing sweat-damp hair from his face. His hands trembled slightly before he curled them into fists. "I'm fine. You should go." "No." The single word hung between them. Vilcor looked at her, surprise flickering across his face. Through the bond, she felt his shame at being seen this way. Vulnerable. Broken by memories. Ilara didn't offer empty comfort. Didn't promise everything would be fine, or that the nightmares would stop. Her father had taught her that some wounds didn't heal cleanly. They left scars that ached in cold weather, reminders of damage done. Instead, she simply stayed. She sat on the edge of his bed, not touching him, not speaking, just present. Slowly, Vilcor's breathing steadied. The rigid tension in his shoulders eased. He didn't ask her to leave again. They sat in silence as minutes stretched. The bond, which had been pulling painfully all night, finally settled into something almost peaceful. The ache in Ilara's chest faded completely. "My father made me execute my first prisoner when I was 12, Vilcor said suddenly, quietly. "A man accused of stealing bread. I hesitated, and my father beat me in front of the entire court, then made me do it anyway." Ilara said nothing. There were no words adequate to that kind of horror. "I dream about them sometimes," he continued. "All the people I killed on his orders. Wonder if any of them were actually guilty. Wonder how many died because a child was too afraid to refuse his father." "You were a child," Ilara said. Children don't have power to refuse men who hurt them. I have power now. His hands unclenched slowly. I can choose differently. I am choosing differently. Yes, Alara agreed. You are. They remained there as night deepened toward dawn. Not speaking, but not alone. Two people bound by fate, both carrying damage, both trying to be better than what broke them. Eventually, exhaustion won. Ilara found herself drowsing against the headboard, and Vilcor's breathing evened into sleep. For the first time since the bond manifested, rest came easily. When dawnlight woke her hours later, she found herself lying beside him, both still fully clothed and carefully not touching. The bond hummed contentment between them, satisfied finally by simple proximity. Vilcor's eyes opened, meeting hers. Neither spoke. They both understood what had shifted during the night. Not acceptance of the bond, not forgiveness for the circumstances that created it, but perhaps the beginning of something real beneath the magic and politics. Two damaged people choosing, however reluctantly, to trust. Chapter 4. Steel and Silence. The training yard was empty when Alara arrived at dawn. Mist clung to the packed earth, softening the edges of the weapons rack and the wooden posts used for sword practice. She had dressed in the simplest gown she could find, though even that felt restrictive compared to her old servant's clothes. Vilcor was already there, stripped to shirt sleeves despite the morning chill. Two practice swords lay on a nearby bench, their blunted edges dulled by years of use. You came, he said, not quite managing to hide his surprise. You commanded it, Alara replied. Besides, I'd rather learn to defend myself than wait for the next assassination attempt with only prayers for protection. He picked up one of the swords and tossed it to her. She caught it awkwardly, the weight unfamiliar in her hands, heavier than she remembered from childhood lessons with her father. Your grip is wrong, Vilcor said, moving behind her. His hands covered hers, adjusting her fingers on the leather-wrapped hilt. The bond hummed contentedly at the contact, and Alara gritted her teeth against the pleasant warmth spreading through her chest. Relax your shoulders, he continued. You're holding all the tension there. It will tire you faster than any fight. Maybe I prefer to be tense around men who nearly had me executed, she said. Fair, he said, stepping back. But it will still get you killed. They moved through basic forms. Defensive stances, footwork, how to pivot without losing balance. Alara's body remembered fragments of her father's lessons, muscle memory stirring beneath years of kitchen work. But she was clumsy at first, too aware of Vilcor watching, of the bond pulling at her attention. Again, he said when she stumbled. Lead with your left foot. Balance through your center. She tried. Failed. Tried again. Sweat began to dampen her hairline despite the cool air. Better, Vilcor said after a time. You're remembering. My father taught me, Alara said between breaths. He said even a girl should know how to hold a blade. A wise man, Vilcor said quietly. Then he attacked. Not with full force, but fast enough that she barely raised her sword in time. The impact jarred her arms, sending shock waves through her shoulders. She stumbled back. What? He pressed forward, not giving her time to think. Strike, parry, advance. Alara reacted on instinct, blocking more by luck than skill. Her breath came harsh and ragged. An assassin won't wait for you to perfect your form, Vilcor said, relentless. Move. Adapt. Something shifted in Alara. The fear of failure burned away, replaced by old anger. Anger at being powerless, at watching crimes go unpunished. At 6 years of swallowing her voice, she stopped only defending. She attacked. Her blade swung toward his side. He blocked it easily. But surprise flickered across his face. There, he said. That's what I wanted to see. They continued until her arms trembled with exhaustion. When he finally called a halt, she was panting, sweaty, and oddly exhilarated. Her body remembered how to be dangerous, how to be more than invisible. You did well, Vilcor said. He wasn't even breathing hard. We'll train every morning. Your instincts are good. You just need to trust them. As they left the yard, Alara became aware of watching eyes. Nobles on a nearby balcony, observing with poorly concealed interest. Among them stood Lady Vesper, her auburn hair gleaming in the strengthening sunlight. Her expression was calculating. "They're talking about us," Alara murmured. "Let them," Vilcor said. "While they gossip, we work." The talk turned vicious by midday. Alara heard the whispers as she walked the corridors. Servants fell silent when she passed, but not quickly enough. Words like enchantment and false bond and kitchen witch followed her like shadows. The formal test came during the evening meal. The great hall was crowded, nobles in their finest silks and velvets. Alara wore deep green, the crown resting on her pinned hair. She felt every eye tracking her as she entered on Vilcor's arm. They had barely taken their seats when Lady Vesper rose from her place halfway down the hall. She approached the high table with measured steps, her smile sharp. "Your Majesties," she said, curtsying perfectly. "Might I offer the court's congratulations on your union?" "Your words are kind," Alara replied evenly. "Only honest," Vesper said, "though some in the court find themselves curious. Mate bonds are so rare. Some might even say mythical." Her gaze moved between them. "To have one appear so suddenly, at such a convenient moment. It has given us much to discuss. Courts rarely lack for topics to discuss," Vilcor said, his tone dangerous. "True," Vesper agreed. "But when those discussions concern the stability of the throne, it becomes more than idle gossip. Forgive my bluntness, but some worry that perhaps outside forces are at work. Old magic, perhaps. There are tales of bonds being falsely woven." The hall went silent. Every conversation stopped. All attention focused on the high table. "You're suggesting I used magic to deceive your king?" Alara asked, her voice calm despite the fury building in her chest. "I suggest that in uncertain times we should question convenient coincidences," Vesper said lightly. "A condemned servant suddenly becomes queen. It is curious." Alara studied the woman before her. Vesper was intelligent enough not to believe her own implications. This was about planting doubt, undermining authority. "I spent 6 years scrubbing your pots," Alara said clearly. "If I possessed such powerful sorcery, don't you think I would have used it sooner?" A few nervous laughs broke the tension. "I survived by being invisible," Alara continued, "by staying silent while men like Lord Vorian drowned their wives and faced no consequences." The hall erupted in shocked murmurs. Somewhere near the back, glass shattered against stone. "Those are serious accusations," Vesper said, her smile faltering. "Against serious crimes," Alara replied. "And now I have a voice to speak them. If I wanted power, Lady Vesper, there are far simpler methods than enchanting kings." Vilcor's hand covered hers on the table. Through the bond, she felt his fierce pride. "My mate bond is not subject to debate," he said quietly, lethally, "nor is my choice of Luna. Question it again, and we will have a different conversation about loyalty." Vesper paled and retreated hastily to her seat. Later, after the meal ended and nobles dispersed in hushed clusters, Vilcor led Alara to a tower room she hadn't seen before. Maps covered every surface. Weapons lined the walls. "My war room," he explained, "where I think when the court becomes unbearable." Alara moved to examine a map of Valthrin and its territories. "You carry all of this," she said. "The politics, the threats, the constant testing. How do you not go mad? Who says I haven't?" He poured 2 cups of water, handing her one. "Today was the first of many such encounters. They will test you repeatedly, looking for weakness. You showed them steel instead. I showed them I have a tongue, and no patience for insults. Same thing," he said dryly. "The distinction doesn't matter." He moved to stand beside her at the map, close enough that she felt his warmth, the bond settling into contentment at the proximity. "I need you to understand something," Vilcor said. "I don't want a decorative Luna who smiles and attends ceremonies. I need a partner, someone who will tell me when I'm wrong, even when it's dangerous." The word partner hung between them, heavy with implication. "And what do I get in return?" Alara asked. "Power to make real change," he said. "Protection to speak truth without fear, and my trust, which I don't give easily." Through the bond, she felt his sincerity. He meant every word. "Be careful what you promise," she said. "I may start enjoying telling you no." His mouth curved slightly. "I'm counting on it." That night, Alara returned to her chambers exhausted but restless. The conversation with Vesper played through her mind. the way nobles had watched her, weighing her worth, searching for cracks. She stood at her window, looking out at the darkened gardens, and thought of her father, thought of his voice. Courage is choosing dignity when the world offers survival. She had chosen once in that great hall. Now she chose it again every morning she woke wearing a crown. Through the bond, distant but present, she felt Vilcor still awake in his own chambers, felt his thoughts circling the same problems she wrestled with. Vorian, the court, the delicate balance of power and justice. Neither of them slept easily that night. But for the first time, the bond didn't feel entirely like a trap. It felt like a lifeline. Two people drowning in different ways, reaching for each other in the dark. Not love. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But partnership. Choice. Something real building beneath the magic that bound them. Chapter 5. Blood and Secrets. The documents lay spread across the library table, damning evidence written in meticulous script. Alara studied the ledgers while Vilcor paced behind her, restless energy radiating from him through the bond. 3 council members, she said quietly, all receiving payments from Vorian for years. Lord Hadric took the most. Hadric has been my father's advisor for decades, Vilcor said, his voice tight. I trusted him. He chose gold over integrity, Alara replied. She traced a finger down the column of numbers. These payments increased significantly around the time Lady Vorian died. Hush money, perhaps. Or rewards for ruling her death accidental. Vilcor stopped pacing, coming to stand beside her. Through the bond, she felt his cold fury. Not the explosive rage of his father, but something more controlled, more dangerous. We move carefully, he said. Expose them during the council meeting tomorrow. Let them hang themselves with their own lies. Alara nodded, already planning questions, angles of attack. They worked late into the night, preparing their case. When exhaustion finally forced them to rest, the bond settled into contentment at their shared purpose. Morning came too soon. Alara woke in her chambers, the bond tugging gently toward Vilcor. She rose and dressed, choosing a gown of dark blue that made her look more queen than servant. The crown sat heavy on her head as she made her way to the council chamber. The meeting had barely begun when Vilcor laid the evidence on the table. These ledgers were recovered from Lord Vorian's holdings, he said. They detail payments made to 3 members of this council over a period of 7 years. Hadric's face went white. The other 2 implicated councillors froze. Your Majesty, Hadric began. Surely there is some mistake. No mistake, Alara cut in. The payments increased dramatically 3 years ago. The same month Lady Vorian drowned. The same month you ruled her death an accident without proper investigation. This is outrageous, one of the other councillors sputtered. We are being accused based on forged documents. Are they forged? Vilcor asked softly. Or are they evidence of corruption that has rotted this court for years? The interrogation continued, methodical and brutal. By midday, all 3 had confessed under the weight of evidence. They were stripped of titles and taken to the dungeons to await trial. That left the real problem. Vorian himself. He'll know we're coming for him, Alara said as they left the council chamber. Those were his men. His allies. He'll move against us before we can move against him. Let him try, Vilcor said. But through the bond, she felt his worry. The attack came 2 days later, during Alara's morning ride through the royal woods. She had taken to riding early, before the castle fully woke. It was a moment of peace, of freedom from watching eyes and political games. 2 guards accompanied her, both handpicked by Vilcor for their loyalty. They were a mile from the castle when masked figures emerged from the trees. Protect the queen, one guard shouted, drawing his sword. The attack was swift and brutal. The masked men moved with trained efficiency, overwhelming the guards within moments. Alara tried to shift, to call on her wolf, but pain exploded in her shoulder. She looked down to see a dart protruding from her flesh, the feathers marking it as tipped with wolfsbane. Her vision swam. The world tilted sideways as the poison worked through her system, blocking her connection to her wolf. Strong hands caught her before she hit the ground. Take her to the tower, a voice said. Muffled by cloth, but familiar somehow. Move quickly before the alarm is raised. Darkness claimed her. When Alara woke, she was in a circular stone room. Morning light filtered through arrow slits high in the walls. Her hands were bound with rough rope, her shoulder throbbing where the dart had struck. The wolfsbane still coursed through her veins, making her feel hollow and weak. A door opened. Lord Vorian entered, removing his mask now that concealment was pointless. His cold blue eyes studied her with satisfaction. "Good," he said. "You're awake. We have much to discuss." "Let me guess," Alara said, forcing her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "You plan to kill me and blame bandits. Neat, tidy, no witnesses. Eventually," Vorian agreed. "But first your mate will receive certain demands. Territory, power, a formal pardon for past crimes. He will agree to all of it, or you die. Either way, I win. If he agrees, I gain power and you live under my control. If he refuses, you die and he appears weak for sacrificing his fated mate. You underestimate him," Ilara said. "Do I?" Vorian moved closer, crouching to her eye level. "I've spent years building networks, buying loyalty, positioning myself. Your king is young, idealistic, still clinging to notions of justice and fairness. He will break trying to save you." Alara studied him, noting the confidence, the arrogance. She needed to keep him talking, to buy time, and she needed information. "You're very proud of your networks," she said. "All those years of planning. Tell me, did you plan to murder your wife from the beginning? Or was that an impulse?" His hand cracked across her face before she saw it coming. Her head snapped to the side, blood filling her mouth. "Don't speak of her," Vorian said, voice low and dangerous. "Why not?" Alara spat blood onto the stone floor. "Ashamed? You should be." "She was innocent. She was weak," Vorian corrected. "Constantly weeping, constantly questioning my decisions. She would have destroyed everything I built. So you drowned her and called it an accident." Alara watched his face carefully. That must have taken practice. Planning. "How did you learn to kill so efficiently? Or was she not your first?" His expression shifted, pride warring with caution. "You want to know about killing? I've been perfecting the art since before you were born, girl. Your precious king's father, the great Alpha King, didn't die of natural causes. I poisoned him slowly over months. Made it look like illness. No one suspected. There it was. The confession she needed. But she needed him to believe she was helpless. Not a threat. Impressive," she said, letting fear color her voice. "You've thought of everything." "I have," Vorian agreed, his arrogance returning. "Which is why you will stay here until your king kneels. This tower is abandoned, forgotten. No one will find you." He left, locking the heavy door behind him. Ilara waited until his footsteps faded completely before she moved. The rope binding her wrists had been tied hastily. She twisted her hands, ignoring the burn as rough fibers cut into her skin. The wolfsbane made her weak, but her human strength remained. She found a sharp edge on the stone wall and began sawing the rope against it. Hours passed. The wolfsbane slowly weakened in her system, though not fast enough. Her wrists bled from the effort, but the rope finally gave way. She stood on shaking legs, assessing her prison. The tower was old, truly abandoned as Vorian claimed. But high in one corner, she spotted movement, a bird's nest, which meant birds came and went through the arrow slits. Alara climbed onto a broken piece of furniture, reaching up toward the nest. A raven watched her with intelligent eyes. "I need your help," she whispered, as if the bird could understand. She tore a strip from her dress, the fabric still bearing the royal emblem embroidered in silver thread. Carefully, she tied it around the raven's leg. "Find him," she said. "Find the king." The raven tilted its head, then launched through the arrow slit. Alara watched it disappear into the morning sky, a small black shape carrying her only hope. She sank back to the floor, pressing her bleeding wrists against her abdomen to slow the flow. The tower was cold. She was weak from wolfsbane and blood loss, but she had done what she could. Now she could only wait and hope that Vilcor would understand the message, that he would find her before Vorian returned with demands and violence. Through the bond, faint and distant, she felt Vilcor's distress. He knew something was wrong. He was searching. "Hold on," she thought, sending the message through their connection, even though she didn't know if he could feel it. "I'm alive. I'm fighting. Find me." The day stretched endlessly. Alara dozed fitfully, conserving strength. The wolfsbane continued to fade, her connection to her wolf slowly returning. By evening, she could feel the shift hovering just beneath her skin, close but not quite reachable. Footsteps echoed on the stairs. Vorian returned, carrying food and water. He seemed pleased with himself. "Your king received my demands," he said. "A messenger delivered them at noon. By tomorrow morning, he will respond. I expect he will agree to everything." "He won't," Alara said. "He'll come for me himself." "Then he's a fool." Vorian set the food just out of her reach. "Eat. I need you alive for the exchange." He left again. Alara crawled to the food, ate mechanically. She needed strength for what was coming, because through the bond, growing stronger as the wolfsbane faded, she felt Vilcor, felt his determination, his rage, his absolute certainty. He was coming, not to negotiate, to wage war. And when he arrived, she would be ready to fight beside him, not wait to be rescued. The moon rose through the arrow slits, casting silver light across the stone floor. Alara closed her eyes and reached for her wolf. It answered finally, surging up through the wolfsbane's lingering poison. "Not yet," she told it. "Soon. When the moment comes, we shift. We fight. We survive." The wolf settled, patient and ready. Alara's hands found the stone she had been slowly loosening from the wall over hours of patient work. It came free, heavy and sharp-edged. Not a sword, but a weapon nonetheless. She waited in the darkness, listening for footsteps, feeling Vilcor's presence through the bond growing closer. The rescue was coming, but she wouldn't wait passively to be saved. She would meet them halfway, blood and stone and fury. Tomorrow, one way or another. This ended. Chapter 6. Blood and Fire. The raven reached Vilcor at dawn, its wings ragged from hard flight. The strip of fabric tied to its leg bore the Luna's silver embroidery, unmistakable proof that Alara lived and fought. Vilcor studied the bird with grim focus, his jaw tight. He knew immediately where she was being held. Only one abandoned tower stood in those woods, an old watchpost he'd had marked on his patrol maps months ago, useful to smugglers and traders who believed the crown no longer remembered it. "Gather 10 of our best," he commanded the captain of his guard. "We ride within the hour. Tell no one where we go." The ride through the forest was tense and silent. Vilcor felt Alara through the bond, distant, weakened, but burning with determination. She hadn't given up. That thought fueled him as they closed the distance. They found the tower just after midday, crumbling stone rising from the forest floor. 2 guards stood watch at the entrance, mercenaries by their mismatched armor. They fell quickly and quietly to Vilcor's men, throats slit before they could raise an alarm. Inside, the tower smelled of damp stone and old fear. Vilcor moved up the spiral stairs with his sword drawn, his men following close. At each landing, they encountered more guards. The fights were brief and brutal. Vilcor's training under his father had been cruel, but it had made him deadly. "Hold positions on each floor," he ordered quietly. "No one enters or leaves." The highest chamber door was barred from outside. Vilcor's heart hammered as he lifted the heavy beam. Through the bond, he felt Alara's sudden alertness. She knew he was close. He kicked the door open. The scene inside froze for a heartbeat. Alara stood near the far wall, her dress torn and bloodied, wrists raw from rope burns. In her hand, she clutched a jagged piece of stone, her stance defensive but exhausted. Vorian stood between them, a knife glinting in his hand. Then everything exploded into motion. Vorian lunged at Alara. She dodged, but the blade caught her upper arm, opening a shallow cut. Before Vorian could strike again, Alara's body began to shift. Bones cracked and reformed. Brown gold fur rippled across her skin. Within seconds, a wolf stood where the woman had been, smaller than an alpha's form, but fast and furious. She leaped for Vorian's knife hand, teeth snapping. He jerked back, cursing, and his attention split between Alara and Vilcor. That split second was all Vilcor needed. He closed the distance, sword raised. Steel met steel as Vorian barely blocked the strike. The older lord was skilled, decades of survival teaching efficiency and cruelty. But Vilcor fought with something Vorian had never possessed: purpose beyond self-preservation. Their blades clashed in a deadly dance. Vorian pressed toward the door, trying to escape. Vilcor cut off the angle, forcing him back toward the center of the room. A mercenary burst through the doorway behind Vilcor, sword raised to strike at the king's unprotected back. Ilara's wolf form slammed into the man's legs. He went down hard, skull cracking against stone. She stood over him, snarling, then turned her attention back to Vorian. 2 against 1, Vorian panted, circling. How noble. You speak of nobility? Vilcor's voice was cold. You murdered your wife. You poisoned my father. You built your power on corpses and lies. Vorian's eyes widened fractionally. She told you about the old king. Clever girl. Too clever for her own good. He feinted left, then drove his blade toward Vilcor's side. The Alpha King twisted, the knife scoring across his ribs but missing anything vital. He brought his sword down in a brutal arc. Vorian blocked, but the force drove him back against the wall. Yield, Vilcor commanded. Face justice for your crimes. Justice? Vorian laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. There is no justice. Only power and those too weak to seize it. He lunged one final time, putting all his strength behind the blade aimed at Vilcor's heart. The Alpha King sidestepped, grabbed Vorian's wrist, and slammed it against the stone wall. Bones cracked audibly. The knife clattered to the floor. Vilcor's sword pressed against Vorian's throat. One thrust would end it. End the threat, the corruption, the years of hidden crimes. His father would have done it without hesitation. Would have called it strength, efficiency, justice. Through the bond, he felt Ilara's presence. Not words, but emotion. Steadiness. Trust. A reminder of who he had chosen to be. No, Vilcor said quietly. He lowered the sword fractionally, just enough to wound pride but not flesh. You will stand trial. You will face the people you've wronged. And they will decide your fate. Vorian spat in his face. You're weak, just like your mother. The words were designed to provoke, to make Vilcor lose control. He felt the rage spike hot in his chest, the old training screaming at him to strike, to punish defiance with death. Instead, he smiled coldly. My mother was the strongest person I ever knew. She survived my father for 20 years, and still found ways to show kindness. You wouldn't understand strength if it cut your throat. He nodded to his guards. Bind him. Carefully. If he tries anything, break his legs, but keep him breathing. As they hauled Vorian away, Vilcor finally allowed himself to turn fully toward Ilara. She had shifted back to human form, crouched naked and shivering against the wall. He stripped off his cloak and wrapped it around her shoulders, careful of her injuries. You came, she whispered. Always, he replied. His hands trembled slightly as he checked her wounds, the cut on her arm, rope burns on her wrists, bruises darkening along her ribs. Can you walk? I can fight, she said, attempting a smile. Walking should be manageable. He helped her stand, supporting her weight as they made their way down the spiral stairs. His men had secured every floor, the servants and remaining mercenaries bound and ready for transport. The rescued servants wept when they saw Ilara alive, some reaching out to touch her cloak as if she were a miracle. Outside, horses waited. Vilcor lifted Ilara onto his own mount, then swung up behind her. She leaned back against his chest, exhaustion finally claiming her now that the immediate danger had passed. The ride back to the castle was slower than the outward journey. Vilcor held Ilara carefully, one arm wrapped around her waist to keep her steady. Through the bond, he felt her drifting in and out of awareness, the wolfsbane still working its way out of her system. You escaped on your own, he said quietly as they rode. The tower, the bonds. You freed yourself before I arrived. I sent you a message, she murmured. The raven found you? It did. Clever. My father taught me to think, not just obey. Her voice was fading, sleep pulling at her. Said thinking kept you alive longer than any sword. He was right. Vilcor pressed his cheek briefly against her hair. Sleep. I have you. She did, trusting him with the vulnerability of unconsciousness in a way she never had before. Through the bond, he felt the shift. Not acceptance of their situation, not forgiveness for how it began, but a grudging acknowledgement that they were stronger together than apart. By the time they reached the castle, word had spread. Servants lined the courtyard, nobles gathered on balconies, guards stood at attention. All eyes tracked the Alpha King carrying his Luna, bloodied but alive. Healers rushed forward. Vilcor relinquished Alara only reluctantly, watching as they carried her toward the medical chambers. Lady Maera appeared at his elbow. "The council is assembled, Your Majesty, and Vorian's remaining allies are fleeing the castle. Let them run," Vilcor said. "We know who they are now. We'll deal with them after the trial." He followed the healers, ignoring protocol and propriety. When they tried to bar him from the healing room, he simply looked at them until they stepped aside. He would not leave Alara alone and vulnerable. Not after everything. The healers worked efficiently, cleaning wounds and applying poultices. The wolfsbane had mostly left her system, but exhaustion and blood loss had taken their toll. When they finally finished and withdrew, Vilcor pulled a chair to her bedside and sat. Greta, the old laundress who had testified about Lady Vorian's murder, appeared in the doorway with blankets and hot tea. She nodded to Vilcor, her lined face showing approval. "She's stronger than any of us gave her credit for, Your Majesty. Survived 6 years invisible, then survived being queen. That takes a different kind of courage." "Yes," Vilcor agreed quietly. "It does." Hours passed. Outside the windows, evening fell into night. Alara finally stirred, her eyes opening slowly. "Vilcor? Here." He moved closer, taking her hand carefully. "You're safe. We're at the castle. The healers say you'll recover fully." She squeezed his fingers weakly. "Vorian? In the dungeons. Alive and awaiting trial as you wanted. Justice, not vengeance." Something relaxed in her expression. "Good. That's good." She drifted back to sleep, but her hand remained in his. Vilcor sat through the night, watching her breathe, feeling the bond settle into something that felt less like a trap and more like a foundation. They had fought together, bled together, chosen mercy together, not the partnership they had wanted, but perhaps the one they needed. When dawn light crept through the windows, Alara woke again. This time her eyes were clearer, her grip stronger. "We have work to do," she said. Vilcor smiled. "Yes, but first, you rest. The kingdom can wait one more day for its Luna." "Can it?" She raised an eyebrow. "How very indulgent of you, Your Majesty." "I'm learning," he said. "You're a terrible influence." "Good." She closed her eyes again, but there was the ghost of a smile on her lips. Someone has to be. Chapter 7. Justice and Claiming. 3 days after the rescue, Alara stood before a mirror in her chambers, studying the woman reflected there. The cuts on her arm had scabbed over, the rope burns on her wrists fading to pink, but it was the look in her eyes that had changed most. Harder than before, more certain. She had stared death in the face and survived. That left marks deeper than any blade. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Vilcor entered at her invitation, dressed formally in black and silver. The trial would begin within the hour. "Are you ready?" he asked. To watch justice finally served? Alara adjusted the crown on her head, the weight familiar now. "I've been ready for 3 years." They walked together through corridors lined with nobles and servants, all heading toward the great courtyard where the trial would take place. Vilcor had insisted on holding it outdoors, in full view of anyone who wished to attend. Transparency, he called it. Accountability. The courtyard had been transformed. A raised platform held chairs for the jury. 6 shifters representing different ranks and territories. 2 regional alphas, 2 betas from merchant families, 2 omegas chosen by lot. Unprecedented in Valthrin's history. Beside them sat the witnesses. Greta, her weathered face solemn, and several servants who had worked in Vorian's household over the years. The crowd was enormous. Citizens packed every available space, climbing walls and hanging from windows for a better view. The air buzzed with anticipation. Vorian was led in chains to a wooden dock before the platform. His expensive clothes had been replaced with simple prisoner's gray, but his cold blue eyes remained defiant. When he saw Alara, his lip curled in contempt. Vilcor took his place not as judge, but as prosecutor. Another innovation. "This trial," he announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard, "concerns the murders of Lady Vorian and my father, the former Alpha King, as well as conspiracy to commit treason. I present evidence, But the jury alone will determine guilt and sentence. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Kings did not surrender power so easily, but Vilcor had made his choice clear. He would not be his father. The evidence was presented methodically, the ledgers showing payments to corrupted counselors, the testimony of Greta, who described in painful detail what she had witnessed at the lake, another servant from Vorian's household who spoke of how Lady Vorian had feared her husband, how she had confided her terror to the kitchen staff in the weeks before her death. Through it all, Vorian sat stone-faced. He offered no defense, no explanations. His silence was its own kind of arrogance. Then Alara was called to testify. She climbed the platform steps, feeling every eye upon her. She had been a kitchen servant 3 weeks ago. Now she spoke before the entire kingdom. "I was gathering moonflower by the lake during the Festival of the Twin Moons," she began, her voice steady. "I saw Lord Vorian arguing with his wife. I watched him force her head beneath the water and hold her there until she stopped struggling. Why did you not come forward?" One of the alpha jurors asked. "Because I was nobody," Alara replied simply. "A low-ranking Omega with no protection, no power. Who would have believed me over a powerful lord? I stayed silent to survive. And the accusation regarding the former Alpha King?" the same juror pressed. "While imprisoned in the tower, I provoked Lord Vorian into revealing his crimes. He confessed to poisoning the former king slowly over months, making it appear as natural illness. He was proud of it." Vorian finally spoke, his voice dripping scorn. "The desperate lies of a woman who used sorcery to seduce a king. You expect this court to believe her word over mine? I expect this court to weigh evidence, not rank," Alara replied. "The ledgers prove your corruption. The witnesses confirm Lady Vorian's fear, and your own actions, kidnapping the Luna, attempting to blackmail the king, speak to your guilt better than any testimony." The jury deliberated for 2 hours, while the crowd waited in tense silence. When they emerged, the head juror, an alpha from the eastern forests, stood to deliver the verdict. "On the charge of murdering Lady Vorian, we find the accused guilty. On the charge of poisoning the former Alpha King, we find the accused guilty. On the charge of treason, we find the accused guilty." The courtyard erupted in shouts, some of approval, others of shock. The head juror raised his hand for silence. "The sentence is death by beheading, to be carried out at dawn tomorrow. May the gods have mercy on your corrupted soul." Vorian was led away, his face finally showing fear. Alara watched him go, feeling no satisfaction. Justice wasn't supposed to feel triumphant. It was supposed to feel necessary. As the crowd dispersed, Vilcor found her. "You spoke well." "I spoke truth," she corrected. "It shouldn't be remarkable, but in this court, I suppose it is." He smiled faintly. "You're changing that. One truth at a time." That evening, Vilcor summoned his council to announce the reforms that would follow the trial. 3 seats had opened with the arrest of the corrupt members. He filled them with Lady Mayra, Commander Eldon, and a young beta scholar known for integrity. "Furthermore," he said, looking at each counselor in turn, "the Luna will have voting authority equal to mine in all matters of domestic policy and justice. Her voice carries the weight of the crown." Protests erupted immediately. The remaining old guards sputtered about tradition, precedent, the natural order. Vilcor let them speak, then silenced them with a look. "The natural order," he said quietly, "is what men invent to justify keeping power. I am changing that order. Adjust, or find positions elsewhere." Later, in the privacy of the library, he and Alara reviewed the documents for the new law she had drafted. The right of refusal. Any citizen could question an unjust command without automatic punishment, provided they presented valid reasoning. A council would review such cases impartially. "It's revolutionary," Vilcor said, studying her careful script. "It limits royal power in ways that will make every noble in the kingdom nervous." "Good," Alara replied. "They should be nervous. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. You've seen it yourself." He set the document down, his green eyes serious. "This is what you meant to do from the beginning, isn't it? Not just survive, but change the system entirely." "I watched evil go unpunished for years," Alara said. "I swallowed my voice and hated myself for it. If wearing this crown means I can prevent others from facing that same choice between dignity and survival, then I'll wear it. Vilcor reached across the table, taking her hand. Through the bond, she felt his admiration, his growing respect. We make a good team, he said quietly. We do, she agreed, surprising herself with the truth of it. The night before Vorian's execution, Vilcor found Ilara standing on her balcony, staring at the stars. He joined her in silence, their shoulders nearly touching. Do you regret it? He asked. Any of this? Which part? Ilara glanced at him. Being nearly executed? Being kidnapped? The mate bond that neither of us asked for? All of it. She considered the question seriously. No. I regret the circumstances. I hate that it took terror and blood to get here. But standing in this place with the power to make real change, I don't regret that. Even the bond? Ilara looked at him. Really looked. She saw the man who had tested dozens for courage because he was desperate to find someone uncorrupted, who fought his father's legacy every day, who had surrendered judicial power to a jury because he refused to become a tyrant. The bond is complicated, she said finally. It forced us together, took away choice. But what we're building, the partnership, the trust, that's ours. We're choosing it daily. Vilcor's expression softened. I never wanted a mate, thought it was weakness. And now? Now I think I was afraid of needing anyone. He turned to face her fully. But you make me better. You challenge every lazy assumption, every inherited cruelty. You see what this kingdom could be instead of what it is. That sounds suspiciously like affection, Ilara said, a hint of teasing in her voice. Perhaps it is. He reached up, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was tender, unhurried. Ilara, I need to ask something of you. Formally. Ask. The mate bonding ceremony should have happened already. Tradition dictates it occurs within days of the bond manifesting. But given everything, he paused. I want to do it properly. Not as obligation, but as choice. Will you accept the bonding ceremony? Will you let me mark you as my mate before the kingdom? Through the bond, she felt his vulnerability. This wasn't a command or expectation. It was a genuine question, offered with the understanding that she might refuse. Ilara thought of the girl she had been 3 weeks ago, invisible and silent. Thought of her father's voice. Live with dignity. She was living now. Truly living. Yes, she said. But on one condition. Name it. I mark you first. She met his eyes steadily. Tradition says the alpha marks the omega, claiming them. But we are equals. I claim you just as you claim me. Vilcor's smile was brilliant, transforming his usually stern face. Deal. 3 nights later, under the full moon, the courtyard filled again. This time for celebration instead of judgment. Torches lined the space, casting flickering light over the assembled crowd. Musicians played ancient songs of bonding and union. Ilara wore a gown of midnight blue that seemed to capture starlight. The crown rested on her elaborately braided hair. Vilcor stood beside her in black and silver, the king's circlet on his brow. The high priest spoke the traditional words, but Ilara barely heard them. Her focus was on Vilcor, on the bond humming between them, on the choice they were making before their people. When the priest finished, Vilcor turned to Ilara. I ask for your consent before all assembled. Will you accept my mark, my protection, my partnership? I will, Ilara said clearly. If you accept mine. Surprise rippled through the crowd. This wasn't traditional. Vilcor's smile grew. I do. Ilara stepped forward first, as they had agreed. She tilted Vilcor's head to the side, exposing his throat. Then she shifted partially, just enough for her teeth to sharpen, and bit down on the junction of his neck and shoulder, the bonding mark, visible proof of their union. Vilcor exhaled sharply, but didn't flinch. When she pulled back, blood welled from the bite. It would heal into a permanent mark, showing the world he was claimed. Then it was his turn. He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing her cheek. Thank you, he whispered, too quietly for anyone else to hear. For choosing me. He bit down on her neck, the pain sharp but brief. Through the bond, sensation flooded, not just physical, but emotional. His fierce protectiveness, his growing love, his absolute certainty that she was the strongest person he had ever known. When they separated, The bond flared between them, golden and complete. They turned to face the crowd as truly bonded mates. The courtyard erupted in cheers. Nobles who had questioned Alara's legitimacy now bowed. Servants wept with joy. Commander Eldon raised his sword in salute, and the guards followed suit. That night, in chambers that Alara had finally agreed to share with Vilcor, they consummated the bond properly, not with the desperate urgency of lust, but with the careful tenderness of two people who had fought their way to trust. Afterward, lying tangled together, Alara traced the mark on Vilcor's neck. "We did it," she murmured. "Actually chose each other." "We did," he agreed, pulling her closer. "And tomorrow we keep choosing. Every day." Through the bond, she felt his contentment matching hers. They were building something new in Valthrin. Not perfect, not without struggle, but real. Honest. Just. For the first time since the crown was placed on her head, Alara felt peace. Chapter 8. New Dawn. 6 months had transformed the kingdom of Valthrin in ways both subtle and profound. Alara stood at the window of the council chamber, one hand resting on the swell of her belly, watching morning light paint the courtyard gold. The castle that had once felt like a prison now felt like home. Complicated, demanding, but hers. "Your Majesty," Lady Mayera's voice drew her attention back to the room. "The petitioners are ready." Alara turned from the window, settling carefully into her chair at the council table. The pregnancy had been easier than expected, though the healers warned she still had 3 months remaining. At 6 months, the child made its presence known, with frequent kicks and shifts that sometimes made it hard to concentrate during long meetings. Vilcor entered through the side door, his hair still damp from morning training. He caught her eye and smiled, the expression transforming his usually stern face. 6 months of partnership had changed him too. He laughed more now, carried less weight alone. "Shall we begin?" he asked, taking his seat beside hers. Not at the head of the table, but beside her. Equal positions. Equal authority. The morning's first petitioner was a young beta soldier named Torin, nervous but resolute. He had requested an audience to challenge a royal decree regarding increased taxation for the new eastern fortifications. "Your Majesties," Torin said, bowing, "I come to invoke the right of refusal." The room went still. 6 months since the law had been enacted, and this was the first time someone had publicly exercised it regarding a direct royal decision. Every eye turned to Alara and Vilcor, waiting to see if they would honor their own law. "Speak your objection," Vilcor said calmly. "We're listening." Torin straightened, drawing courage from the invitation. "The eastern fortifications are necessary for defense. I don't dispute that. But the harvest was poor this year in the border villages. Families are already struggling to feed their children. The taxation, as currently structured, will push many into starvation before winter ends." He pulled out a ledger, hands shaking slightly, and presented figures. Crop yields, family sizes, existing debt burdens. He had done his research thoroughly. "I propose," Torin continued, "delaying the fortification by 1 season. Allow families to recover from the poor harvest. Implement the taxation next spring when they'll have reserves to draw from. The delay adds some risk to our defenses, but losing citizens to starvation is a greater loss than any enemy could inflict." Silence stretched across the chamber. Alara studied the young soldier, seeing echoes of herself in his courage. Speaking truth to power, risking consequences for the sake of others. "Your analysis is sound," she said finally. "Lady Mayera, do the treasury figures support his claims?" Mayera consulted her own ledgers. "They do, Your Majesty. The eastern villages reported yields at 60% of normal. The taxation as currently scheduled would indeed create severe hardship." Vilcor leaned back in his chair, considering. Through the bond, Alara felt his thought process, weighing defense needs against citizen welfare, pride against wisdom. "Soldier Torin," he said at last, "you've done more thorough research than some of my paid advisors. Your proposal is accepted. The fortifications will be delayed 1 season, and taxation adjusted accordingly." Relief flooded Torin's face. "Thank you, Your Majesty. Both of you. Thank you," Vilcor corrected, "for having the courage to speak up. This is exactly what the right of refusal was designed for. ensuring leaders consider all perspectives, especially those from people living the reality of our decisions. As Torin left, the other counselors exchanged glances. Some looked impressed, others uncomfortable. The old guard still struggled with the idea of their power being questioned, but it was working. The law was working. After the council session ended, Alara made her way through the castle gardens. The autumn air was crisp, leaves turning gold and red. She walked the path slowly, her hand on her belly, feeling the child move within. She found the memorial garden she had commissioned 3 months ago. Simple stone markers honored those who had died in service to the kingdom, including common soldiers often forgotten by history. At the center stood a larger stone bearing her father's name: Bryn, Guard, and Protector. Alara knelt carefully before it, the baby protesting the position with a sharp kick. She smiled and adjusted. "Hello, Father," she said quietly. "I visit when I can. The baby makes it harder to kneel these days, but I wanted to tell you, we're doing it. Building the kingdom you would have wanted, where dignity matters more than rank, where courage is valued over obedience." She traced his name carved in stone. "I wish you could meet your grandchild, could see what I've become. Not just a queen, but someone trying to do right by the people. Just like you taught me." The wind rustled through the garden, carrying the scent of late-blooming flowers. Alara felt peace settle over her, something she hadn't expected to find in this place. "I hope you're proud," she whispered. Footsteps approached. Vilcor joined her, lowering himself to sit on the stone bench nearby. He had given her space for these visits, understanding she needed time alone with her father's memory. "How was your meeting with the Eastern Alphas?" she asked. "Productive. They've agreed to support the new judicial reforms." He studied her. "Are you well? The baby?" "Both fine. Just saying hello to Father." She stood slowly, accepting Vilcor's offered hand. "Did I tell you I want to name the baby Bryn if it's a boy? Or Brianna if a girl?" "You mentioned it." Vilcor's hand covered hers on her belly. "I think it's perfect. Your father's legacy should continue." They walked together through the gardens, past beds of herbs and flowering shrubs, toward the castle proper. Servants they passed smiled and bowed, no longer the fearful prostration of Vilcor's father's reign, but genuine respect. "The kingdom is changing," Alara observed. "I can feel it. Not just in laws, but in how people carry themselves. There's less fear, thanks to you," Vilcor said. "You showed them someone could stand up to power and survive. That courage isn't punished, but rewarded." "We showed them," she corrected. "I stood up, but you didn't strike me down. That's what changed everything." They reached the council chamber balcony, looking out over the kingdom spread before them. Fields and forests, villages and roads, all part of Valthrin. Their responsibility, their legacy. "What kind of ruler do you think our child will be?" Vilcor asked suddenly. Alara considered. "I hope they'll be kind. Strong, yes, but kind. Someone who understands power is responsibility, not privilege." "We'll teach them," Vilcor said. "Both of us. Show them that true strength comes from lifting others up, not keeping them down. And if they want to be a baker instead of a ruler?" Alara asked, half joking. "Then we support that too." Vilcor's expression was serious. "Our child will have choices I never did. They'll know love, not just duty, safety, not just survival." Through the bond, Alara felt his determination, his promise to break the cycle of cruelty his father had perpetuated. They were building something new, not perfect, but honest. A kingdom where merit mattered more than birth, where justice was transparent, where even the lowest-ranking Omega could challenge the king without fear. That evening, they hosted a small dinner for their closest allies: Lady Mara, Commander Eldon, the Reformed Council members, and Greta, the laundress who had first testified against Vorian. The old woman sat at the high table, looking overwhelmed but pleased. "To 6 months of change," Vilcor raised his cup, "and to all of you who made it possible. To the kingdom Valthrin is becoming," Alara added. "May it continue to grow in justice and compassion." They drank, then fell into easy conversation. Stories were shared, laughter echoed through the hall. For the first time in generations, the royal table held people from every rank, united not by fear, but by shared purpose. Later, in their shared chambers, Alara and Vilcor prepared for bed. The familiarity of the routine was comforting. 6 months had transformed awkwardness into intimacy. "I've been thinking," Vilcor said as he helped her with the laces of her dress, pregnancy making it harder to reach. "About succession. Already planning for our child's rule?" Alara teased. "Planning for their choice," he corrected. "Traditional law says the eldest child inherits automatically. But what if they don't want it? What if they're not suited for it?" Alara turned to face him. "You want to change succession law too? I want our child to have what we didn't. Genuine choice. If they want the throne and prove themselves worthy through deed, not just birth, they inherit. If not, we choose an heir based on merit, ability, and desire to serve." "That's revolutionary," Alara said. "Every noble in the kingdom will fight it." "Let them fight." Vilcor's eyes were determined. "We're not building this new kingdom just to fall back into old patterns with the next generation." Alara kissed him, slow and deep. "I love you," she said. The words still felt new, even after months of saying them. "You impossible, idealistic, stubborn man. I love you too," he replied. "My fierce, brilliant, terrifying queen." They settled into bed, Vilcor's hand resting protectively on her belly. Through the bond, they felt each other's contentment, each other's hope for the future. "Do you ever wonder?" Alara asked into the darkness. "What would have happened if I had said yes that day? Accepted Vorian's proposal? You would have found a way to kill him and escape," Vilcor said without hesitation. "You're too strong to be broken. But we wouldn't have this. The bond. The partnership. No," he agreed quietly. "We wouldn't. I'd still be searching for someone brave enough to challenge me. Still be alone, trying to fix a broken kingdom by myself. Fate works strangely," Alara mused. "It forced us together, but gave us the tools to choose each other." "Perhaps that's the point," Vilcor said. "Not all bonds are chains. Sometimes they're foundations." The baby kicked hard, making them both laugh. Alara guided Vilcor's hand to where their child moved restlessly within. "Our legacy," she said softly. "Not just this child, but the kingdom we're building. A place where someone like me, nobody from nowhere, can stand beside a king and change the world." "You were never nobody," Vilcor said fiercely. "You were exactly who the kingdom needed." "Who I needed." They fell asleep, wrapped around each other, the bond golden and settled between them. Outside, the kingdom slept too, dreaming of the future they were building together. A future where courage mattered more than birthright, where justice was transparent, where even the smallest voice could echo loudly enough to change the course of history. In the morning, there would be more work, more challenges, more nobles resisting change, and citizens learning to speak up. But tonight, they rested. The king who learned to share power, the queen who refused to be silenced, and the child they would raise together, heir to a kingdom transformed by the courage of two people who chose dignity over survival, and chose each other every single day. The end.